Hey, in the last few minutes, I'm like to open it up to the audience. If any of you have any questions for the panel.
We have books for people who ask questions.
And it's okay if you're not a designer. Not everybody here is a designer. If you're not a designer, some other kind of uxer, ask us questions about that.
So my question is, I'm more of a mobile developer, so I make Android and iOS apps. When I'm building an app, I'm trying to like do some new like innovative like UI or UX, like something that people are not doing, like thinking out of the box. Is that a good thing to do, or should I follow the convention, go with what other popular apps like the patterns, like for example, one as simple as like pull to refresh. A lot of people do that, but I'm thinking of a different way to enable refresh on mobile phones.
Shake to refresh.
Shake, but like just like that's just one example.
Yeah. Well, I think the first
What do you-
question
what do
is,
you-
what's your motivation? Like, are you
Yeah.
trying to be different just to be different? Or is it that the marketplace is, crammed with a million products and you really want to stand out?
Yeah, stand out and like
Right.
delight the user. I guess that's the main motivation.
Yeah, well, it can work. It's hard. I think it's a battle you have to pick, and then obviously you have to test it. But I think thinking about, the function of the product and the users, because if you're going to adopt users who have been using a competing product and you want to lure them over, something delightful, if it's truly delightful, it can be beneficial. But that means you have to match all the other value. Because if there's some delight but they've lost some functionality, they're not going to come over. So that you have to evaluate in the context of, I think, the entire product. Like doing something whizzy just for the sake of doing something whizzy, that wears off pretty fast. Like even think about every time you see in a spinner animation, it's like it just wears off. And so gimmicks can be cool if they become a new trend, but that's a really hard thing to pull off. So yeah, I would analyze the motivation. If it's not like in your heart, I would think second.
Yeah, make
I
sure it
would
tells a good story.
Yeah.
Don't go for gimmicks. You add embellishments like that after you have a great experience already.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to add delight, but delight doesn't have to be pervasive in the product. I mean, sometimes it is, which is great, but it's okay if the product is obvious to people, because it's very consistent, and there's a few things about it that are just like, oh, I love it every time I do that part,
Right.
There's a great book Dan Saffer just published called Micro Interactions
Micro-
that
Yeah.
really looks at the tiny things that happen at different points in an experience that can produce delight at the right moment and not pervasively. I recommend you check
Like
that out.
Apple does that a lot.
In my experience at Apple and other places too, a lot of those things that are so cool are the ones that get into the press and they go doing the demos. That got added in the last week of the project after it was officially over. And somebody ran in and made a couple of changes to code, and then, at Apple it would be show it to Steve Jobs and he'll make it the demo. So, but they're there just to kind of bring smiles on their faces. When someone's trying to get work done, they sometimes can get in the way.
Yeah, like there's the MailChimp example, where the one thing like you stretch the page too wide and the arm breaks and the chimp face goes into pain mode. Like those things are great, and that was like really, really a new idea at the time. But I think you've got to have the core of the product. That's got to be. So our thing is that we build business apps, and so for us, delight can be defined in many ways. For us, delight for somebody using a business application is being incredibly productive. Like they don't want to be using that app more than they have to. They just want to get in, get out, be done. To them, they're like, that was a good day. And if we get that part down and then we add something that's cool, that's great. But adding the cool thing first, we'd be toast.
Right. That's last.
I'm a user experience researcher. I would like to hear your opinions on how UX people can work more efficiently and effectively with the engineering team in an agile development model, especially for those UX research activities, user requirement gathering and the usability testing, how those activities can better fit into the big picture in a fast-moving agile development environment.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of rapid iteration testing and evaluation, which is it's a method of doing testing we build a prototype that's just good enough to start testing, and you change the prototype during the test, which would be heresy, 5-10 years ago in user
It's
research.
necessity.
But I think it's a really powerful way to rapidly improve where you started from, and get the engineer, the UX designer, the product manager all in the same room, observing the test and making recommendations about what to change, and sharing a vision of the product. So there are lots of nice artifacts of that process besides just getting to the better product faster. It's getting to a shared vision and getting to a deeper understanding of the product.
I love the panel, by the way. Thank you all for your diverse experiences and sharing that. I definitely heard key skills are empathy, communication, and storytelling. But are any of you seeing trends of the next key skills that we're going to need for the next 3 years or so?
Yeah, so my hiring in the last 2 years has changed radically. And I think actually, we touched on this earlier, just around an interaction designer who's just an interaction designer now, for me to hire is pretty uninteresting. And we're looking for a really diverse set of skills. And I'm trying to build basically these little mini design studios on our team right now. And I'm trying to make them very, I want their skills to be really complementary but overlapping. And I want them to be very autonomous and very self-reliant. And the only way that actually works is if you've got people who can do a lot of diverse skills. And the big change we've done recently is we've had a very technical design team for a long time. But that's something that we never really dug our heels into and accelerated that. So we've got a lot of stuff going on now where we're taking, I've got one team that is just blowing my mind. Like, it's one of those things, like you try experiments, and every so often you do an experiment and then something just clicks. And I've got a team now of an amazing designer who is visual interaction and can do some code, and he's an amazing communicator. I've got a researcher who can do amazing design communication stuff, and she can dig in and actually do suggestions for design. Then I've got a prototyper who he's like, his brain thinks in code, but you show him a screen and he's breaking it down in code and saying, why are you doing that? And why that shouldn't happen there? Why, well, that piece over there doesn't match this. So the three of them are this superhuman entity. And like, I can throw them stuff and they crank things out faster than any team I've ever seen. And it's blowing my mind. And it's actually funny, are there any like sci-fi fans in the audience? There's a Theodore Sturgeon book from 1957 called More Human Than Human. And it's this great idea that human evolution at some point in a single human organism will evolve to its optimal state. And at that point, single organisms can't actually evolve any further. So the idea, and this is like 1957, is of collective humans. And in the story, there's this crazy creature, which is actually 5 humans. And one is like called Baby. It's like they're telepathic, but physically incapable. And there's another one that's like a beast creature that's like really physical. But there's 5 creatures that kind of come together to make a superhuman. And that's sort of how I'm thinking about my teams now. I need these, they're all different, but you combine them together and it's just something magical happens. And I think it is this cross skill set of thinking about what do you need to do to make a product. It's got to look great. It's got to behave beautifully. It's got to function. It's got to do exactly what people want. And the only way to do that effectively is going back to this: you got to tell a story. You got to know who it's for. You got to make a compelling pitch. You've got to sell it really well. And the only way to do that is to do prototypes and concepts that do the selling for you. And we get to the point now where like, oh, what are you going to build next? And this guy on this team did an Objective-C prototype on the phone. I walk up to an executive. I'm like, check this out. Tap, tap, tap. Pull down where there's this delight thing, which is actually freaking amazing. And they're like, oh my God, we're building that. And it's a 5-minute pitch. We took 2 weeks to prepare it, but that 5-minute pitch is just done.
So I'm a front-end developer who wants to steer towards becoming a product designer. I'm curious about your guys' thoughts on how to productively manage prescriptive feedback, right? The inevitable, when you're working with a group of non-technical or non-designers, the inevitable, hey, you should really put this button right there. When you really do need more space for that process to explore more solutions. How can one learn to be more graceful in the face of that?
Well, first of all, sometimes they're right.
Yes.
And when they're right, they'll remember that one forever. So you have to be
And
ready
hold it
for
over
that.
them.
Just know they may be right, even though you're sure they're wrong. But yeah, it needs to be turned into an evidence-based decision, and you just need to learn how that person can get convinced of that or reminded of that when they get hung up on exactly where that button should go. It's like, oh, that could be true. We should run a quick test and see. And we can fit that in. If this meeting's really short, and now there's a good time to end it, get out of there and test it. And be open-minded, because I have seen them sometimes right. It's like, how could that be? And eventually I understand why it was true, but never would have guessed.
Yeah, step one is actually, sounds really simple, but listen. Like first, if they say that, listen and then ask them. Say, well, what do you think, and where's that coming from? And if they're saying, oh, well, I've seen it in this other app, you'd be like, oh, that's great, but like this might be kind of a different app, or it might be the context of the app is different. But you actually just want to, evidence-based is you can do evidence-based testing with your users or potential customers, or you can do evidence-based just on what are the patterns out there right now, where did the idea come from, and I think that's. So you're talking about. Like, it sounds like you have a kind of an emotional thing there that somebody's gonna be like, you should do this. And I think a lot of designers, the first reaction is like, no, that's not my idea. And I think that is, that's a transition that every designer goes through. Like, every designer starts off with that everything you make is your child, and you never insult somebody's child. And you could.
Yeah, it
Bad
kind of
idea.
goes back to Larry's
Yeah.
original comment about letting go of the need to be the one who came up with the
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to, we should all be after the customer success. And the people you have to watch out for are the ones, and don't become them, are the ones that are after their glory and not the customer success. And they'll do anything they can to undermine the product if it gets, if they can see something in it that is recognizably theirs. When what everybody should be after is whatever the definition of the success was, which is probably not the success of a particular employee.
So we have time for one more question. Oh.
So this actually pertains to more creative people who are starting their way or just applying for jobs. Did any of you ever encounter a resume that was so fun, so creative, that but yet so different, that you just said, I like this, this is fun, I'm going to put this in the yes pile.
Yeah.
Because sometimes what happens is a lot of good ideas, a lot of good creatives out there who feel that they're actually dealing with HR personnel or recruiters. Is that something that you guys want to see? Is that something that people should avoid doing?
Well, Chelsea and I did a workshop on this at University of Washington and walked through a whole bunch of use cases and examples. And so first thing to know is resumes, how are those actually consumed these days? So most of the time you're going to post, like you're going to in ASCII, you get to post something into a field. Like, depends on where you're applying, but very often you can design the most beautiful thing ever. It's never going to be seen. That's one risk. And the other thing, we were doing our analysis of various resumes, and we encountered somewhere like they were really clever, they were really beautiful, but they were completely unreadable. And if I had to do 100 resumes in a morning, or if I had to do 100 resumes in a week and I have to crank through these things, for me the most important thing is legibility and the clarity of the communication. Like a resume, like your portfolio should be beautiful. Like that should be stunning. Your resume is to tell me who you are, and that's, to me, I coach people to say, tell me a story, and I want that story to be broken down into the things that I can scan really quickly. Like if I can go and be like, okay, like literally resume formats, you can go and be like, okay, that's a skills piece. I can look at it in 3 seconds, if that, and I can actually parse it enough. And the rest of it is all the experience pieces, and I want to be able to read that as quickly as possible. Like it literally is just legibility. And then the other thing that I've actually noticed, which is more important to me than necessarily the visual side, is the personality. Is it the way that that's actually written, the craft of the craft of the words and how those things are conveyed, and doing really clear declarative statements that actually convey, really important information, rather than, you can write sentences that are very fluffy, that sort of get around things, are very passive and sort of, hinting at things. But the ones that I get that stand out are really declarative, clear, and, full of some life in there that I can actually pick out, and like that stands out to me more, is the personality piece.
Yeah, I look through, like I'd say, first of all, it's absolutely right. It's not the resume. It's not the resume. It's the portfolio. I don't start with the resume ever. Always start with the portfolio. So make sure that's awesome if you're a designer. And then I guess my one feedback was just make sure you have good typography. Because I will look at plenty of resumes in the past. I don't look at them pretty much anymore. And like just toss them if it's just bad type. Because you don't care about the details. You don't care about the readability. You don't care about the beauty. All that's shown in
Spell
there.
check.
Oh my God, spell check is
So annoying.
I mean, I don't know about you guys,
Details
but
matter.
like the last time I put together a resume was 1998. And since then, everything has really been about LinkedIn and your network.
Twitter,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Get your
So-
endorsements up.
It's
You get
really
your
about the
endorsements up.
portfolio.
Yeah.
It's really about the portfolio. So,
If I can add to that, actually, and speaking about that, did you ever get any calls from people who actually applied and never heard back, and they wanted to know what went wrong? Did you guys ever provide that feedback?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that maybe, I think it's designers in general tend to be quite social. I think managers and leaders, I think that's something that I know that for my career at this point, I care incredibly deeply about the people, and I have coffee with people all the time just to chat and to coach people and give advice. And we had somebody in the other day. They interviewed. It wasn't the right fit, but we took the time at the end of it to actually say, these are the things in your portfolio that didn't work for us. And it's not necessarily the work. It literally, for us, it was part of the presentation. And we definitely take the time to do that because in the end, the Valley it's a pretty big place. For UXers, it's a pretty small place. And keeping relationships open and being positive about every interaction you have is incredibly important. So we do it partly as a brand as Salesforce. It's like Salesforce UX, we want to have a brand that stands out. We're transparent, we're collaborative, we're totally open, we're super positive, and we want that to carry through interviews and throughout everything we do.
Yeah, that person you turned down for a job may be hiring you in a few years. So, and I've seen it happen. So keep that in mind and you'll respect them.
I interviewed Sarah at her first job, and then she went way above me. I'm catching up now.
That's
Slowly
right.
catching up.
That's right.
so Fred, Sarah, Ian, Larry, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.